Hey guys, we're back with week number 2 with this new series, Back to Basics. And just as a recap, in case you weren't with us last week, we are taking 5 weeks. H-O-U-S-E. Yes, I always have to count. You think I would remember? It's 5 letters. I don't do English good, but we're taking each week and doing the acronym HOUSE. And so last week I cheated and I said H was household, and we looked into that. And we looked specifically, and we had to start with, okay, let's go back to basics and look at what the church is, or how do we be the church. And we talked about how the term ecclesia, with the preposition ek and then the noun from the verb kaleo, which means call. Ek means out. So like the word for church means the called out ones, or those who have responded and have come out. Okay, and so like there's a lot packed into that term, and I want to make sure that's clear. It's not just like the called out ones, because there's a universal call for people to enter the church. Like that invitation to come follow Jesus that we looked at last series in Matthew chapter 4 is extended to all people. Okay, so it's not just those who are called out, because that invitation extends to all, but it's those who respond and have come out. So I wanted to make sure that was clear, because even the term Christian in and of itself means little Jesuses or little Christs. So the church is people who have accepted the invitation, have come out of the kingdoms of this world, whether that be an ultimate rule of life that's centered around themselves, or alternative religious allegiance, or anything like that, or maybe like themselves in the terms of that they reject all kind of religious allegiance, and so their allegiance is strictly to themselves, which is a form of religious allegiance, if you ask me, but that's aside the point. And those who have responded and rejected the kingdoms of this world, or self, or other religious allegiances, they've rejected those and aligned and pledged their allegiance and accepted the invitation to enter into the kingdom of heaven with Jesus as the one only true king. That's the church. Like that is the called out ones, those who have responded and followed through and come out. Okay, I wanted to make sure that was clear, because I also wanted you to like not think like just in the fun part about English, just looking at it as called out. Well, everybody's called out. Like, hey, save yourself. Like, you're called out. That kind of thing. So that the church isn't just those who have received the invitation; it's those who have accepted it as well. Okay. So, and then last week, the second part that after we looked at what is the church, it's a people, not a building, or not all these other things. It is a people. The church is comprised of these people who have accepted the invitation of the King. And what do they do? Also, we looked at the word oikos, by the way, which is family. That's going to come into play a little bit more here today and for the rest of the series. But the second part of last week is we looked at what does the church do? And we used another acronym called SWAG. It's not a word I use very often, but we looked at how we looked at the early church and just to decipher and try to analyze and determine what is it that the king desires at the basic level. Let's go back to the basics. What's the basic level that we can see lived out by the church when it first started, without all of these distractions or age passing where you can be like misled and stuff like that. And so we looked at simplicity. Like they lived a life of simplicity. They invested into one another. They didn't load down the church with all these other things that might be good. Don't get me wrong. Some of these things are good, but it was simplistic. Like I was reminded on the radio, just because it's good doesn't mean it's from God. This kind of thing. God doesn't call us to do every last thing. In fact, that's the beauty of the church and having multiple parts, but we'll look at that next week. Okay, sneak peek. There you go. The W was witness. They witnessed. They lived a life that testified to the reality and the good life that comes from this new allegiance and new citizenship in this kingdom. A was a symbol. They assembled regularly, not just for weekly gatherings and learnings, but they assembled regularly, breaking bread, eating meals together, going to the marketplaces together, things like that. And then they lived a life of generosity, or they gave. The G was give. And I wasn't just talking about financially, but I was also talking about they gave from deep of themselves. They shared with those who had need. They gave hope. They gave love. they gave assurance, they gave confrontation when needed, they gave accountability, and so the community was just a giving community. So today, though, we're going to lean into the next letter of house, O, which might be a little confusing, but hear me out. We're going to go with the word organized. Okay, and my main point for today is this. I'm going to give it to you now, and then the rest of our time together is going to be supporting this thesis, if you will. Okay, that we intentionally organize communal and individual habits that imitate Jesus, so that way we can love and honor God, and we live as the family of God. There's that oikos word coming back into play a little bit. So let me rephrase that again in a different way. We need to be, in order to be the church and do what the church does, we need to be organized in terms of having intentional efforts that are not just thinking that, like, well, if I plan this out, it's not genuine. No, if I'm planning something out because I can be scatterbrained, I'm going to plan this out because it's genuine and I have a genuine interest to want to do it. That's what I'm trying to pull us to, because, and I'm operating from this lens. I know it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but I am operating from this lens because the kingdoms of this world and the way the world does things today is so fast-paced, so driven to do, and there's little time to practice rhythms of rest, rhythms of Sabbath, and anything like this, okay? And actually, this is a good time to this little plug. This month, the month of May, we're going to be working as a community to equipping you guys with resources, having conversations about, if you've never done something called a rule of life, we want this to be a rule of life prepping season. In terms of our calendar as a church community of Direction Church, we've picked May as our rule of life prep season. So that way, whether you plan one for a whole 12 months, a whole year, or whether you do one, hey, I'm going to do a rule of life for this quarter of the year, for the next 3 months, and then I'm going to reevaluate it and maybe see what God wants me to do for the next quarter. That's fine. But this is something I think that's important, and we want to make sure we set aside some time as a community to encourage, to teach, to educate, to help, and to walk along each other, both communally and individually, with this concept of rule of life. So now back to this organized thing, because that also pertains, but back to this. Here's why. I had you guys, and if you were not part of our main gathering here in the Des Moines Metro yet, you might not get some of the text messages that we send back and forth or whatnot. And so if you have no idea what I sent, now's a good time to pause this and go read and spend a little bit of time in Romans chapter 14, because this is going to give a background or a foundation of an example that I'm going to use a couple times here today, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, okay? But so pause this, go check that out. If you have already spent time in Romans 14, put that picture in your mind now, okay? If you got it, good. In Romans 14, it's just this is the easiest, not the easiest, actually, I take that back, but it's one of the shortest examples of what I'm going to call a disordered family. Now, I need to know, I need to disclaim this, that there's going to be some big portions of the family of Christianity that is going to disagree with what I'm about to say. That doesn't bother me. From my study and from my convictions and as I study the Bible and how I have observed how people change and how people become more like Jesus through this sanctifying work of the Spirit, I believe this to be true, and I genuinely think it is true. So I'm going to teach this as it's true because that's what I believe, okay? I just wanted to be fair in case you come from a more reformed background or some fringe background. This might seem strange, okay? But here's what I want you to think about. The church is in and of itself is honestly a disordered family, because people come to Jesus and then are changed. They don't I don't believe Jesus says, hey, in order to enter the church, in order to become a part of my family, you have to fix your mess. Pick up your mess, clean up your mess, and then you can come in. I don't believe people are changed before they come into the church. I think they can be, but I don't think that's the norm. In fact, so when you have multiple people from different backgrounds coming from different things, now picture Romans 14 for a moment. You have this picture of people who think it's okay just to eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols, and you have other people that's like, no, you can't. So there you have two different groups of people coming from different backgrounds with different beliefs and different baggage, and now you have this disorganized family. And so I'm going to actually use the term disordered or disorganized. I'm disordered. I like it better. As simply this, a state of confusion, or it's unorganized. Okay? So I believe that when we are in proximity with others whom we are different from, the example in Romans 14, chaos happens sometimes. Does it stay there? No. Because I don't believe that you're going to get fixed and then come to Jesus. I believe if he is the healer, you come to Jesus and he fixes. Like, that just makes the sense to me logically and scripturally. So when we live in proximity with others who are different from us, chaos happens. You get messy. Things get messy. But this, I think, is not, I don't think Jesus was naive. I don't think Jesus didn't know that this would be the reality. And I think this is exactly what Jesus calls us into. I think there's something in this process that we, in the form of building deep-rooted, genuine community with one another, that Jesus is saying, hey, you're going to come here and it's going to get a little messy because you're going to figure out and you're going to be transformed alongside other people who are being transformed from a different angle, and there's going to be things that you're going to not agree on or not come aligned, and that's okay, because this is a family where I'm the king, not you. So, I have to ask this, what happens when you find yourself confused? What happens when you're in a room, maybe, and it's unorganized? Well, some of us just say, well, I'll leave the room. Go find another room to work in. I think when I find myself, at least in a state when I'm confused, I want to go seek answers. I want to go find clarity. When I find myself in a room that's disorganized, most of the time, deep down inside, I have a desire to have it organized. However, does that actually happen all the time? No. Okay? If you look at my office at home, it's a mess. Mainly because I'm jumping from one thing to another, and I just don't take the time and schedule out the time to organize it, but I want to. So, sure, you can continue in the state of confusion and work around the unorganized mess. I'm a walking example of that. But it will in fact require sacrificing the full potential of what it is you're doing. So, I'll give you an example. It takes me longer to do things sometimes because I'm so distracted I look over and I'm like, oh, there's a book that I was just using for this other thing. Oh, that reminds me. And then I start shifting to this. Sacrificing the potential of getting this one task done or this one assignment done that I'm working on. So let me connect this a little bit of why this is important for the ecclesia, for the church, and specifically as a family, as an oikos. The church functioning as a family is vitally important because it is the vision of Jesus for the church is that it isn't about programs, but it's about people. So you need some sort of lens and framework to contain this vision for the church that our King has. Programs, you can just fit in. That's like there's no emotional ties. There's no relational ties. If it doesn't work, you just throw it out and find a better program. But for people, you don't just throw people out. In fact, the world, I think this leans into a little bit about the witness concept of swag from last week. The world is used to the church, and this is a generalization, I get it, but just give me some grace with this for a moment. But the world is very used to the church functioning as a business. They're used to churches trying to grow their footprint, to gain influence. And it's all under the guise, maybe well-intended, maybe sometimes manipulative, of saying, well, we need to gather influence so we can share Jesus. But what I struggle with this a little bit is that when the church functions as a business, if there's tension, if there's some chaos in there, or if something's not really working out, you just decide, or the church just decides, you know what, we're gonna go another direction, and they get rid of the problem. But what if Jesus wants us to be a family and not a business so that we work through the problem. What could happen if the world encounters more and more churches functioning as a family? Like if there's tension or something isn't working out, you don't just abandon the person, but you do the hard work of confronting the person. That's uncomfortable, I get it. You do the hard work of understanding the person and making sure they understand you. And you do the very hard work of reconciliation all through the posture of grace, which, by the way, Paul says in 2 Corinthians, we have been given as ambassadors the ministry of reconciliation to reconcile the world, to partner with Jesus in reconciling the world back to himself. So this is very scriptural. Another thing that why the church functioning as a family is important is because we take care of one another. In business, you don't have to do that. You rely on outside things like benefits or insurance or things like that. But in a family, family takes care of family. I almost went Italian there with a family. Okay? Everyone contributes something to one another. Whether that's encouragement, whether that's tangible support, or even simply, get this, a physical presence. In our world, it's becoming more and more disconnected that we just communicate via this or via I'll send you an email. Now, there's benefits to that, don't get me wrong, but that is no substitute for how we are created for physical presence. Being in the same room with somebody, making eye contact with them and saying, hey, how are you? How can I help you? Or, hey, I need help. Can you help me? And the third thing of why the church functioning as a family is important is that sorry, I missed. My iPad's going crazy. Let me spin this from the negative. If the church does not function as a family, here are some things. This is what I was trying to get at. We can, if the church does not take steps in an organized way of intentionality to function as a family, we will be subtly discipled in the ways of the world more than in the ways of Jesus. In the words of Henry Nouwen, and I love this. This was really convicting for me. I read this in a Planting a Church Without Losing Your Soul book by Tim Morey. Phenomenal book. But he quotes Henry Nouwen with this concept of we become more healing wounders than wounded healers. It's just a flip of the words, if you will, but like it makes all the difference. Like, hey, if we don't take steps to function as a family, we don't care who we hurt. We are just in it for ourselves. As a business, the whole function as a business is to grow, is to become self-sustaining. The function as a family is to rely on each other, rely on the king, if you will. And then the last one is this: if we don't take steps to function as a family, the church will end up carrying and bearing the name of Jesus in vain. In fact, what I mean by that, so we oftentimes view, don't use the Lord's name in vain. We don't say the word God, okay? Okay, but that misses the bigger. Like I almost think if Jesus were here today and he realizes that that's where we're stopping short, if that's where we're stopping short, he would go back and amend his Sermon on the Mount and says, you've heard it said, don't use God's name in vain. But I say to you, don't represent God in a way that isn't like God. That's what vain means, emptily. And so we run the risk of representing something that isn't Jesus as Jesus. And I don't think the king is going to be too happy with that. In fact, that's not what the kingdom's about. This is why the church functioning as a family is important. So right now, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to give you this question to think about. Same thing as last week, 2 parts. But I'm going to stop and give you this question. Here's the question. What are some things that you desire and you hope for in your relationship with one another in the church? So take a few minutes. I'm going to repeat that, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes, or I'm going to just put this up here for a minute so you can pause it if you need. And then we'll kind of wrap up, because the next part we're going to pick up is, okay, how do we, here's like the hope, or the first part's like, let's paint the picture of why being a family is important, or start painting that picture to help you continue the conversation. The next one is going to start leaning into what it takes to get there, okay? So there's the question. What are some things you desire and hope for in your relationships here in the church? So take some moments and think through that question. Okay, so you've had time to talk about that. You've had time to think through that, and so this is an important step. Don't neglect that. I definitely want you to think through what are some things that you desire and you hope for, because one of the things that you're going to need to do is sit down. Are these desires that Jesus has for the church to have, or are they just stuff that we're bringing in still, the baggage we're carrying from our other kingdom allegiances? But here's the thing. Part 2 of today is so last week, and I'm kind of keeping this lens. Last week, part 1 was being church. The part 2 was doing church, okay? And so this week was being family, and then this part is doing family, if you will, or doing what it takes to be a family. And so really the biggest thing that I have to share is this: make an effort. Hence why the word organized is the O. Make an effort. Now, thankfully, when it comes to organizing what is disordered, we do not take steps of our own or even of our own design. I'm going to read John chapter 16, just a couple verses here in John 16. Man, I knew this was going to happen. I'm going to lose my spot. Okay, John chapter 16, verses 13 through 15. Jesus is saying this, but when he... and he actually defines who he's talking about. The Spirit of truth, the Holy Spirit, comes. He will guide you into all the truth. He will not speak on his own. He will only speak what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. He will glorify me, because it is from me that he will receive what he is to make known to you. And all that belongs to the Father is mine. That is why I said the Spirit will receive from me what he will make known to you. And then you can flip over to Galatians chapter 5, verse 16. And the Apostle Paul writes this: so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. I love these two passages, combining them, because it really highlights the fact that it is the Holy Spirit who guides your steps. He's the one who's calling you into obedience to our King Jesus. And so it's not really even our own design of okay, I got to figure out how to be organized. I got to figure out how to do this. No, just listen. And if you can't hear him, maybe your organized next intentional step or your effort to take is to start taking steps to understand and hear what his voice actually sounds like. That's why for the past year we have done various things of silence and solitude. And that is extremely hard, especially when you have voices from these other kingdoms still trying to leech on and suck the life back out of you. It's very hard to spend time in silence when you hear voices or your mind drifts. I get it. I am right there with you. It is insanely difficult for me. But if we don't make an effort to try to understand and hear the voice of the Spirit, then we have no idea where we're going, and we're going to be following our own leading and not the Spirit's. If you remember, last week, I shared a passage from Acts chapter 2. I think it was verse 42. But it said they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And the thing I want to emphasize again with this is that they wanted to do it. It isn't just that they're we gotta have fellowship with one another. When you read through that passage and you see how all the people not in the kingdom of Jesus are looking in, and they're looking favorably on this community, because this community is acting like a family who wants to be together, and they wanted to do it. And here's the thing: what happens? Maybe we want to, but what happens when we feel like maybe it's a season, or maybe it's right now? Maybe it's I don't want to, but I want to. I just maybe right now our lives are kind of living a paralleled routine of the struggle that Paul highlights in Romans 7. In the second half of verse 18, I'm going to read it from my iPad for the sake of time, but he says, For I have the desire to do what is good, but I can't carry it out. I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. So I think it's natural and it's human sometimes to be able I don't want to. I want to. But there's an even bigger separation between where we are and the desire we know that we want to have. And I want to highlight this because I don't want to downplay that gap. Some people say, well, just do it anyway. There is some fruit to that. I'm not going to downplay that of pushing through, but sometimes that can also be detrimental because you don't learn the truths and the reality of what Paul talks about the whole rest of the Roman letter, picking up in chapter 12, moving to the end. Because I think the question then is, how do we get to the point of where we're just wishing to the point where we actually, our wishes actually become our true desires? And this is the question, but like, again, I want to emphasize this. We can't just ask it and say, hey, I asked the question, so I did good. I don't need to do anything else. No. When you get an answer, there's an expected response to follow through. James talks, this isn't in here, here we go. James talks about like the implication of people, like, he uses the illustration of somebody going and looking in the mirror and walking away and then forgetting on what he saw because he wasn't really paying attention. I use the one all the time because this happens a lot. You pull out your phone to check the time and you put it back, and then you're like, wait, what time is it? And you pull it back out because you weren't really paying attention. And so, like, was the effort or was the desire really there, or were you just doing that because you're like, this or that? I don't know. But when we ask the question, we have to also be willing to act on the answers we receive. And this is what I was just saying is where Romans 12 picks up and the whole rest of the letter. It's the reason that Paul moves into example after example of things that we do in order to accompany living the new life of a Christian and our partnering with the Holy Spirit. It's while we partner with and obey the Spirit in things like these, like he talks about in Romans 12, Romans 13 and 14 and 15 and 16, it's our partnership that our desires steadily, slowly are beginning to change. And we no longer want, but in fact we actually start earnestly desiring. So it's removing that gap. I think it's like in that Romans 12 passage where he says, be renewed or be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I'm going to share a little bit more of that possibly here this week in the podcast, but there's something that has to happen. He understands that there's a gap sometimes between, like, these are the desires of God, and I want to have the same desires of God, but I'm still over here. Like, I want to have the desires of God, but I don't. So how do I get there? Well, it happens with the transforming of your mind. And how do we partner with the Spirit? Because he's doing a bulk of this transforming. And he starts to show, here's things we do. Here's things we live out. Here's things of how we partner with the Spirit. So now, I'm going to give you two practical examples, the encouragement and challenge for the week, and then your ending questions. Okay? The first practical example, I think, is in fact Romans 14. Here's the rubber meet the road thing of this. Romans 14 is a good example of a practical application of what he talked about in chapter 12. It is and so again, like I just said, Romans 12 is the response of God's grace and his mercy that has been revealed in his life, his death, his resurrection, and his invitation. And so we worship him with all that we are. And it requires us to keep living in ways, it requires us to not keep living in ways. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. What did I write there? It requires us not to keep living in ways of the disorganized world, but be transformed so we can test and see how it is that God wants us to live in an organized way. So then you get down to Romans 14, and you see this group of believers coming from this one background, from a Gentile background, meaning non-Jewish. And then you have a group of believers from a Jewish background. Okay, this might be an oversimplification, but I'm going to share this for the sake of simplicity. Okay, from the Gentile background, they are accustomed to eating these, and I've actually heard this taught both ways, and that's the beauty of what Paul does. And I know I'm pausing this for a second to explain something, but he uses the word strong and weak. And in fact, when the hearers would have heard this, that until he explains who he's talking about when, they would have each thought themselves to be the strong and the other one to be the weak. That's the beauty of what Paul does here. Like, the Gentiles think they're strong because they can eat this meat, and the Jews are weak because they can't. The Jews think they're strong because they are honoring God by abstaining from eating this meat, and that the Gentiles are weak because they can't. See what I'm saying? And so, going back into the example, the Gentiles come from a background where the meat that's sold in the marketplace was meat that was used in pagan temples and offered as sacrifices to these idols, to the pantheon of gods. Okay? And then after it was used in the worship, they would take it to the marketplace and they would sell. Well, the Jews obviously have a problem with that. They come from a background of understanding Yahweh and that you shall have no other gods before me and you shall not worship any other god before me. And so they're like, we can't eat that. And so Paul is viewing this. He's never been to Rome yet, by the way, when he's writing this letter, but he can view this situation and he realized there's some chaos here because we have some disorder, we have some disorganization. We have disordered people, both from both perspectives, because we're all disordered, let's be real, okay? And so you have these Gentiles that are coming in here saying the meat's okay, because we know that Jesus is the true God, so we renounce all claims over this meat. It doesn't matter. We have the Jews coming in that are disordered because they're like, no. It doesn't. You can't even have a hint. Can't even have a hint of idolatry in your life. And so I think, to summarize this up, I think Paul gives his thesis in Romans 14, verse 19, when he says this: "Let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to peace." By the way, that's the Greek word eirene, which is the parallel to the Hebrew word for shalom. So peace is accurate, but it also encompasses wholeness, or the way things should be organized. So let us therefore make every effort to do what leads to wholeness, to peace, to all of this goodness of family that God wants, and to mutual edification, or mutual building up. And later on in that passage, he talks about, let us not do things that destroy the work of God. So Paul tells the Roman believers that they need to make an effort to bring organization to this disorganized chaos, and in their, specifically in their interpersonal relationships, before the fallout ends up destroying somebody. And to connect this with what we've talked about earlier, the organized effort was to invest in each other as people, and not into a secondary or tertiary area of theology as a program. So, I like Romans 14 as this example, because Paul says, listen, what you're convicted of, follow, but don't look down on the other person, because they are operating out of a faith in Jesus, and not out of I'm not putting all my eggs in the basket with Jesus, I'm going to hold on to these other gods and then also take Jesus. He's saying no, they are pursuing this out of a conviction that they have that there is no gods, because, and he says this, and also in the Corinthian correspondence some too, we know idols are nothing. We know they're nothing. They're just made up. He also says that demons use those as opportunities to get footholds in people's lives. That's a whole other conversation for another time. But he says in reality, they're nothing. So if you know that, you know the meat's not sacrificed to nothing. It's sacrificed to nothing. And in your mind, you're like, there is no other God besides Yahweh, so I can eat this because they're nothing to me. So he's connecting all of these. And I think this is a pretty good example of the organized effort. Make every effort to do what leads to wholeness and building up of one another as a family. Now, the last example I want to give you is a personal example that is a little less serious. And it's actually the development of how I have become obsessed with reading, specifically reading nonfiction. So when I was younger, I used to read, but only fiction, believe it or not. I would only read fiction. This is the reason it seems strange, but it's the reason I'm jumping to this and doing these little snapshots real quick. It wasn't really until high school, I think, that I started reading a little bit more nonfiction, and it was purely because I saw the example of the guys who were discipling me. And it made me, when I saw them reading nonfiction and talking about nonfiction, and I was growing and being blessed by their consumption and sharing of this, that I was like, man, I want that. I want to experience this, but also I want to share this with somebody. And then it wasn't until college when I was writing back, get this, my senior year of undergrad, mind you, then I was writing back from a conference with some students and a professor. And during our drive, we were talking about, man, this conference was so good. We talked about this stuff. Man, we should have been talking about this in this class. And my professor just simply, he just chuckles and he says, listen, that's the reason I assign the books that I do. He said, I have very limited amount of time to teach you what you just said. And so with everything that there's available, and I want to give you as much as possible, I want you to grow personally, but also your degree's not for you. It's for the people that you're going to encounter years and decades from now. And so what I can disciple you in now is going to be a blessing, not only for you, yes, but for those who come after you, through you. You're going to be in a better spot to be used by Jesus, to be used by the Holy Spirit to minister to these people. And he said, there's a handful of things that I can teach so easily. I got that. So I'm looking at this big smorgasbord of stuff, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to teach this, and I'm going to teach this, and I'm going to teach this. Now, whatever's left, what are the best resources that are the most accessible, that I can assign to you guys to go read, that I can trust, that it's so accessible that you will read and be able to understand and learn. So that way, all the material is covered, not just what I'm teaching you. And it was in that moment that I realized I should have been reading all these books a lot closer. My senior year of undergrad. And in fact, it's completely changed the way I approach all these things, because now I read a lot, reading not just for myself, but reading for what will this potentially do for the next person I meet that might struggle with this. If I read this, how could this be a benefit to the family? Now, the reason this is the example, you might not have been able to pick it up, maybe you have, but the reason I wanted to share this quick story or this quick timeline is because these revelations, if you will, were small deposits that at the time didn't really seem very big. They didn't seem to matter much, but they have led to an exponential return. And I don't say this arrogantly. I say this because even just this week, I was encouraged by someone saying that they have learned so much just from me sharing what I have learned, that I can honestly say I would not have been able to share if those small deposits had not been there. So I'm highlighting this because, and frankly, when I even started undergrad, I had no desire to go for a master's degree. I had no desire. Somebody said, you should go for a master's. I laughed and said, no. But like today, not only do I have a master's degree, but I would love to keep going and to keep learning. Like my craving and desire, I'm trying to connect these dots quickly. My desire now is to continue to learn. Even my freshman year of college, my desire was kind of to learn, but not to continue. Just get the college done so I can get the job and help people. Okay. Now I have an even bigger desire, not only to keep learning, but to help people further. That desire has grown, and it happened because of these small deposits, these small intentional, organized investments that I have made along the way that now are blooming and blossoming into these exponential returns. In fact, since going back to school is not really in the cards, like for a number of reasons, back in 2015, I made the concerted effort to say, you know what, since I can't do that, I will at least read and I will at least find people that can pour into me, that I can ask questions, that I can have cross-examine me, that I can have teach me, mentor me, so I can be sharper and better at helping other people too. So, all that says, I guess I say all that to say this. This is important to me. I'm going to bring this in. Hopefully it makes sense. I trust that God's going to use this. I say this a lot, said it last week, and said it this week a bunch. I can't give what I don't have. So if I don't have relationship with God, I can't give out of that. If I don't have rest, I can't give out of that. If I am depleted and have nothing left to give, and somebody's expecting me to give, that's not going to go well. And so I make intentional, organized investments and efforts to pour into not only myself, but to other people, to be a family, so I can continue to do that. So here's my challenge and encouragement for this week. It relates to bells again. It can be part of the B for bless somebody, but it's do something intentional to support or serve someone this week. That's it. Now, it would have been good if this was last week's, because yesterday we were helping the Papes, but there'll be some other opportunities coming up later this month. It doesn't have to be going to work in somebody's yard or help build a house or anything like that. That could be absolutely helpful for them. It could be something super small. I'm not, don't diminish what it is. Because remember, even the smallest thing can eventually lead to the biggest impact. So that's what I want you to challenge. And maybe I'll even let you, not that you need my permission, to expand it. You don't have to do it this week. Just do it the next month. But you have to make that effort. Get it planned, get it organized, and go for it. Here's the questions to end with. Number one, why do you think it's so difficult, or maybe just shorten it up as this, why is it so difficult to make organized efforts to invest in each other? Why is it so difficult? Number 2 is this. What is one small thing that you will try over the next month to make progress toward a healthy kingdom habit? This question is intentional to tie into the Rule of Life development season. So, I'm not trying to slip one past you. I'm flat out telling you, okay? Number 1, why is it so difficult to make organized efforts to invest in each other? And number 2, what is one small thing that you will try over the next month to make progress toward a healthy kingdom habit? So I hope that was helpful for you guys. I prayed a lot over this, and I worked really hard on this. I'm excited for next week as we come back for the U of house, which I believe, if I don't have it in front of me, is universal. That'll make more sense next week. So see you then.